One. All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Keenan Dung, who is a doctor of physical therapy, a powerlifter for himself, and a full-time powerlifting coach. Most notably, he is the head coach of Anchor Strength Systems, and he's coached some, pretty impressive athletes. I think probably the most notable one is Kyle De Leon, who is also a coach under Anchor. But I know even in this coaching game for a while, I think I remember you used to be like one of the Nori boys, and I saw like your training, and I was like super, super impressed. And I followed you like a while back, and then like it seems like you've sort of transitioned a little bit more into a coach first role, which I think that one of the things that's difficult about coaching and powerlifting is it's a very demanding job when you're doing this full time, and you have like it's actually how you provide for yourself, and you have a full time client roster, and it can be really difficult to be a high level athlete and also be a high level coach at the same time. I wanted to ask you, like, sort of like, what was your experience with that? Is it, it seems like you made like, as I know that you still train, but
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean my training right now isn't super ideal. I mean I try to, make it a point to get into the gym and train myself and train hard, just to keep up with, maybe what my athletes are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And I do think it keeps me grounded in that sense, I can get a feel for okay, yeah, I mean it's hard as hell to go into the gym after a really long work day, so to still be with that and feel it out keeps me more connected with them. Yeah, I mean, my training used to be better when that's all I really had going on. All I had to do was go to school and train hard, which is a hell of a lot easier than, and from a time perspective than, just working. And I actually do work a day job as a physical therapist, and I handle the roster I do. So, I'm pretty busy throughout the day, and I work a lot. So it is tougher for me to dedicate, even a couple hours to the gym 4 times a week. So typically in there for like an hour to an hour and a half, 4 times a week, which it's enough, to get some kind of productive training in. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying right now. I've had my ebbs and flows of training and in as a working adult, and right now I'd say it's probably in its better stage just because I'm a little less busy now that the large competitions have passed and they're already done. So I'm not traveling a lot and getting people really ready for huge competitions. So it opens up a little more time for me to give a little bit more time for myself. Um, and yeah, so training right now is going okay.
yeah, no, I think that what you said about like being time limited. I think that's a really interesting coaching problem to solve, honestly, because you know in an ideal world, the athlete has enough time to do SPD, and they can do like accessory work and push that like really, really hard as much as they need to, and they can all recover from that, right? But if someone's a little bit busier, they have a more limited training time. I found that it tends to like you be a little bit more basic as far as the periodization structure goes. For like how I would basically do things is if we're like in a quote unquote strength phase, or that's more of the priority. I'm going to bias a lot more to the volume, just to let's get as much practice as we can on the SPD, and then we'll just have a very bare bones accessory approach, just to get some so that we don't lose muscle mass. Whereas if we're going into like more of a hypertrophy phase or whatever, I will usually drop things down to like a minimum effective dose on SPD, and then I'll push some more accessory volume just as a result of that. But what do you do with your clients who are a little bit more time limited as far as their training?
Yeah, typically, I prioritize the specificity, of course, being the number one front runner. Accessory wise, I mean, with accessories, I don't think they need to take that long, I mean, very short rest between sets, at least to get some kind of volume in it doesn't take too much time. And whenever someone does have a time constraint, well, one, I'll always work around their schedule. So, okay, if they can't train on certain days, then we're going to do our best to formulate what kind of exposure time we're going to have throughout a microcycle. And then from there, it's really about, okay, can you what is the time dedication you can give to each day, and then try to help them, by managing what workload is per each on each day, depending on what they're able to give.
Hmm. Yeah, I do agree with that. I guess like my whole thing is like, usually if there's time constraint, there's a high stress environment. So usually it's like, I would bias
Sure.
something a little bit more just to make sure it's like in my personal experience, I just know that for myself. The thing that affects my training the most is the mental fatigue. It's not like really physical stuff.
Yeah.
Like I could go on a
Hmm.
long hike and like if I was like having a fun time with my homies, I get home, hydrate well, have a big meal, and I can have a great session. But if I'm
Yeah.
like really mentally or stressed out with like work or relationships or et cetera, like that tanks my training a lot.
Yeah, and it's really like, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the physical part is kind of easy in my opinion. Like, unless you're working on a manual labor job, obviously, then that's completely different. But like after most people or a lot of people's work days, it's mostly just I'm tired and I don't want to train, right? It's just like from a pure energy standpoint. So obviously giving the advice to, on how to prepare for that, maybe you can have some carbs with you or have a snack in between, your work day, or just giving those actionable tips that they can maybe prepare themselves better for their training session might help.
Yeah, I think also just like training time too, because if you know that you're the type of person like myself, like if I wanted to, if I had like a quote unquote real job where I had to be a non-officer somewhere, I
Mhm.
would probably train in the morning because I would not have that mental fatigue going into that session. Like one thing
Sure.
I've had people, you put the acetylcholine on your story today, and I was
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah,
that's
choline,
crazy. It's
yeah.
like I kind of do like a similar thing. Like I know that like there's like no tropics that can help with acetylcholine that can be a strategy to help, get around that mental fatigue just to
Yep.
some extent. But that I also like, I like training after, work or quote unquote. Like, I did that in college, like because like I have my homies there and like I still did okay. A lot of the times it just kind of just comes down to like what I tell my clients is developing that skill to separate what's outside of the gym from what's inside of the gym and to really just focus
Yeah.
on that session. Like especially if you got yourself to the gym, you got your pre-workout meal, you got your pre-workout, whatever. Like you had your whole ritual in that time. It's like focus, like show like you showed up, you
Yeah.
could have chose to stay home.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, you're already there, so you might as well try really hard, right? And going off of that too, another thing uh I've ran into that people have found success with is, just training environment alone matters. Like, if nobody's in the gym, at least for me too, like even from an athlete's perspective, for me, if like nobody's in the gym and it's just dead, like I'm just like, dude, I don't want to be here, versus if there's people around you, even if they're not your friends, or they just having their energy around you, just having them present, right, maybe makes you try a little harder. And so like if you can find that time, assuming that it works within your work schedule, to get in the gym when maybe there's other people around, maybe people that energize you, helps.
Yeah, a ton. Yeah, that's why the SPD Saturday is a big thing too, right? For a lot of people, it's
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
okay, I go hang out with my friends for a long time, and um, that's a lot of fun. That's actually a rabbit hole we could go down at SPD days. How often do you usually program those in? And I'll just tell you, like my bias is like I don't like them unless someone's
Yeah.
like really time constrained. That's the only way I can fit them in. I find that like the fatigue, especially once you get really strong, tends to be
Sure.
like pretty high.
Yeah.
And I find that for, I'm less about like the specificity of an SPD day and more about like what is the actual training that gets the lifter stronger.
Yeah, I never really program SBD days for the sake of like having all your top sets on the same day. It usually comes as a byproduct of exposure timing. So if I feel like the exposure timing, needs to be X, Y, and Z across the lifts, and it just ends up being an SBD day, then that's what it becomes. It's never like I'm never looking at an SBD day through the lens of, oh, I need an SBD day to um, have a performance indicator of all lifts all on the same day.
Yeah, I've never seen that like actually work out. Like I've had
Yeah.
preps where I've done SPD days and preps where I haven't, and I'm like,
Uh,
it's like doesn't correlate at all. Like especially
yeah.
because like there's like if you think about it, it's like let's say you're going at a pretty fast moving meet. Let's say you have 2 hours between your squat and your bench. Like the acute fatigue is going to be a lot less.
Yeah.
In that scenario, especially if you hydrate, you has like, some carbs like in between like that quote unquote central fatigue is going to be basically gone. Um, and deadlift usually isn't that affected in my opinion.
Sure.
I usually find deadlift usually just peaks a lot. It's just because of like the reduction of like squat volume and just like the overall like systemic stress because I find deadlifts are just usually more sensitive to overall fatigue than the squat and bench.
Yeah, and I think I do so I do have one guy that does it, but that's and it was purposeful to have all the primaries on the same day, and that wasn't, a byproduct of exposure timing, but it was because of his work schedule, to work around his work schedule, he has the most time and energy on this one day, and during the week it's like terrible, like he works really long hours, he has a hard job, and so having that all in the same day is because of what's happening around training.
I love how you have this emphasis on just like what's the actual like lifestyle of the client and like
Oh
how
yeah.
is their work schedule because as coaches, I think that's so important to understand like our clients, like not only just like their personalities and what they do like respond to, like what's their actual environment. Because like I used to think there was like one thing that some athlete would respond to, and I'm more convinced that it depends more on like what's your lifestyle, like what's going on outside of the gym, stress levels, etc. Because if you're like I had Joe Bornstein on, like if you do nothing but the power lift and eat and
Yeah.
sleep, like you can
Uh-huh.
handle a lot. Versus if you're someone who's a dad and you have, wife, kids, you have all those responsibilities, a stressful job, and you're trying to fit in training on top of that.
Yep.
Man, that's totally different. People have different schedules. If you have people with healthcare, like nurses work 12-hour shifts very
Yeah.
regularly. Maybe you
Yep.
don't put a very stressful job or a very stressful session around that. And with a lot of those like shift workers I have like varying schedules. It's like I have like basically say like this is your volume you get in. Like this is ideally like what it will look like. But if you need to push something back or combine a session, is you need to sleep. Like please sleep. Like because like it's all dependent upon like what's their shift. It's like sometimes those people like have a very relaxed shift. Other times it's like all hell is breaking loose.
Yeah. And I do think it is super important to, like you said, keep up with that because also too, people change jobs, people have maybe they get a new girlfriend or maybe they have a kid, that they didn't have before. And then so like it is important for you as a coach to keep up with all of those things, not doesn't have to be in super minute detail, but at least get a gross understanding of what their recovery is looking like so that you can, modify training at a microcycle level or pacing standpoint or whatever it may be.
Right. And actually that was one of the questions I had for you with like block length. I know that you had some sort of poster so that you don't think there's actually like one block length that a lifter responds to. And I thought that was very, very interesting because I've had a different experience as a coach. I have seen that like some lifters just seem to respond better to shorter or like a 3 or 4 week or 5 week block. I've kind of seen that like be pretty consistent. Like for example, I've tried out all of those block lengths, and for me, like 5 weeks, just I just feel really flat and tired by the time I get to like week five. Week four is like kind of like the perfect sweet spot. I can do like 3 weeks, but like I don't feel like as strong on like a week three as I do on like a week four. But I want to ask you what's your reasoning behind that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that thought process has evolved to some capacity to, I don't, did I make a post on that or what?
Something on
Where did
Threads. I
on
stopped
Threads?
you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I think that thought process has, I think I'd still stand by that, but also with some caveats. I mean, um, I think my personal well not me personally, but just my bias is towards a 4 week block, right? One, it makes things logistically easier for me to manage my roster. Another thing too is it's just what generally works for the general population, assuming that you're following the pacing that I do, right? I mean, it depends on the pacing of the block too, because that's a large contributing factor to what the block length outcome is going to be, right? If you're pacing things like super aggressively week to week, then obviously like maybe a shorter block length would make sense, right? Or if you're going really slow throughout the block, then yeah, then maybe a little longer block length would make sense. And another thing too with that is, okay, what does the macrocycle layout look like, right? One of the biggest things that I do is plan out the entire macrocycle is to be like, okay, tell me what days you can or you can't train, right? Then I'll block those off and be like, okay, what are we working with here on a 4 or 5 months, 5 month calendar, right? And then okay, like if we have to take this week off because you're going to, the Caribbean or whatever, then we block it off and try to adjust the block lengths based on the days you can't train. Or if there's a meet in mind, then we have to figure out, okay, work backwards from that meet date and figure out, okay, what is a block length going to look like leading up to that meet? Obviously, we want to sift out the awkward weeks, like for as far away from competition as
Yeah,
possible. So we're coming into the meet, with our normal established block lengths, and so those things matter: the meet date and days you can't train, and that will largely influence what the block lengths look like, from mesocycle to mesocycle. And so that's, I guess, where the maybe that comment stemmed from that I made on Threads was the block length itself doesn't matter because I have people doing 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks at varying times all the time, but that's mostly because of pacing or working around days that they can't train, pacing to a meet or working around days they can't train. It's not like oh, we have to run 4 weeks, and then if your week four falls on, you know, uh 1 week vacation, then you're screwed, right? We're gonna just cut that
right.
block or like, modify things around what life has to throw at us because obviously for most people, life is probably more important than training and we should work around that, right?
Yeah, I think that your point about pacing, it does make sense. Because like obviously, timelines matter the most in our sport, and I think that you have to look at okay, like when does the meet come around? How do we have to pace things? And if you're smart enough, you can usually get someone like in a good spotlight. Like for example, if I know someone that does usually respond well to a 4 week block, but we have a 3 week block, I'm probably not going to put them at as high of intensity to end off the block because they're probably not going to be able to benefit from them. Because in my opinion, like if I'm putting like a nine or I will even put a 10. I know I'm insane, but I will put like I only put those intensities when I know a lifter can benefit from them and they have enough momentum from those that we be able to benefit from them. But like if someone has like a shorter block length, I'm probably gonna not try to change like the pacing of the block. Usually, maybe we have a PR and an RPE 7 instead of an 8 or something like that. Or like one of my things with like longer blocks. I've just seen that some lifters just seem to like there's something that happens to their nervous system where like they touch the heavier weight and they just like peak really well. Other lifters, they need that lower anchor point where it's just light and they need to make a really, really big jump from there. But then if you ask them to like go heavier after that point, like they're just kind of cooked. They kind of just fall flat. And I think that like in my experience with like um just understanding like I'll always start someone with like a 4 week block, and usually someone's like they feel kind of gassed. By like week four, I will try troubleshooting pacing first off, see if we can make that
Mm.
social. If they still say I feel gassed and week 3 feels better, week three. If week one after like week four is like consistently showing up like I feel stronger, like, I feel
Mhm.
really good today, then like I will usually go to like a 5 week block. Um and then like that's kind of how I determine these. But like that 4 week is kind of like the baseline I kind of just start off with because it's the easiest and lots of people will just respond well to that.
Yeah, same. And usually block length, isn't something that I will go to initially, right? It's usually, okay, what is the block length I'm working with? And then we pace around that block length. So the block length is always established first based on whatever the macrocycle layout is looking like, based on days they can't train or based on when their meet day is. And then really the pacing is what follows that. It's never for me like I go to the block length as the thing to manipulate to start.
Yeah, yeah, no, right. And, that's not the priority. It comes to it's a microcycle design first, and
Yep,
pacing and
exactly.
all that stuff.
Mhm.
Cool. I want to ask you about you had another interesting post about priming deadlifts with rows,
Mm.
which is something that is very I would say in general counterintuitive.
Mhm.
Because like for example, like I am a very back dominant puller. If I do like back accessories close to my deadlift, man, my deadlift ain't gonna show up the way I want it to. So I just have a
Yeah.
harder time stabilizing my spine. But in my general overview of that was like it sort of gets your body used to some set, let's say like, shooting like a roll with a similar back angle. The lifter
Mhm.
has feel like maybe prime their musculature for feeling like better in that position, maybe like a little bit more like able to like quote unquote like connect with that. Is like for example, like uh, my quads don't feel like a little bit of pump or soreness when I go into my sessions. I have a really hard time hitting the right positions. I just have that less proprioception. I'm assuming is that like a similar thought process with like the rows?
Yep, that is the exact thought process where, sometimes and obviously with deadlifts there's a large spectrum, right? Where you have conventional cat back deadlifters and the most, beautiful sumo deadlifters. So there's a large spectrum there that we can look at. But the general concept was, yeah, exactly that. Like it allows you to just feel what needs to contract, essentially, on a very general basis. Like you said, like when your quads, you don't have like a little bit of a pump in them, right? Then you just have a hard time using them, right? It's a similar concept with the back because obviously with conventional deadlifters, and I know you pull conventional, it's maybe not as because you do have to take into account fatigue, right? Okay, what is the fatigue cost of this rowing movement that I'm doing? And maybe that's something to play with too, is like, okay, maybe I'm pushing these rows prior to the delts too hard. Maybe I don't need to push them as much. Maybe I can get the workload in somewhere else on another day, right? But that's besides the point. The with especially with sumo deadlifters, I'd say majority of my roster pulls sumo. Naturally, I don't know why that is, but most of my roster does pull sumo, and um, a lot of times I see people will get away from the fact that it is a pulling movement, not just a pushing movement, because we've gone, we swung the pendulum one way in terms of, okay, what is the meta in terms of technique, and it's been a lot of let's push through the floor, right, with our legs. Use your legs to engage the wedge, right? And we kind of lost a little bit of sight, or at least, the general social media world lost a little bit of sight of, okay, it's also like a pull, like we can use our back too,
Yeah.
right? And so I find that, help using rows to kind of give that sense back has been helping people.
With that point about the legs, like I found that actually has in most of my clients, I say push the bar away, they like completely forget about like their back. Because like
Yeah.
there's both of those like tensions and like obviously like if you're more of like, it also depends on like what type of lifter you are. Because like if someone's like more of a upright puller, like yeah, telling them to use their legs more is going to probably be smart because that's going to be the greatest contribution. But like for
Yeah.
someone like me, I'm so hip dominant and like back dominant. If I'm thinking of push the bar away from me, bro, I'm in the wrong position. Like my
Yeah.
back starts to hurt. Is like I get my
Yeah.
my hips down too low.
Yeah.
And if I'm just like thinking of like more so like pushing this sounds so fucking dumb, but like pushing through my shoulders. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
that makes sense to like for me it makes
Sure.
sense. It's
Yeah.
like I want to make sure like I'm a little bit more like over the bar. Um so it all like depends, but I think that that overall like perception of like what you're doing makes a lot of it makes a big difference. If you're exposed to similar back angle, it can really
Mhm.
just help you feel that out. I do this with like a lot of like people, but like I think it kind of comes down to like do you respond better to like more of a muscular priming or like a neurological priming? It's like in my opinion, like someone who's like more muscular probably does a little bit better under some sort of fatigue. Someone who is a little more of that, and we're going to talk about doing like rows and other variations,
Mhm.
like a bench press, for example, like a machine chest press instead of, a bench. Or just someone who's a little bit more intensity priming, I'm going to bias more towards a competition movement as, we're going to get that in. That's a little bit more, again, it's neurology of the actual specific skill practice. And then if they have to, then maybe I will put in, a higher intensity, lower RPE priming ones instead of, 1 to 3, helping the bar feel lighter in their hands or on their back. But yeah, those are sort of my
Yeah.
my thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think the priming with Rose kind of opened up opened up at least my thought process on, you know, okay, like because we always talk about like how we're going to prime our, primary day, right? Like with utilizing either the secondary or whatever, if we're benching 5 times a week, the fifth bench day, like how are we going to utilize those days to make the primary feel good? And, and that's I mean, yeah, that's like very important, but the another lens you can kind of add on to that maybe, and then maybe a missing piece is like, okay, what is the accessories doing for that priming effect, right?
Exactly. Well, cool. I think that we would beat that one to death. I
Cool.
wanted
Yeah.
to also ask you about as you are a DPT, lots of lifters, like pain and injury, and like I bring this up because I've had some of my thoughts shift. Like I do still, I think the biopsychosocial model of pain is very good to look at. But I also think that if you're a powerlifter and if you're strong, like you can tolerate some pain, right?
Yeah.
You're probably you used to that. And in my opinion, I've seen a lots of times and oftentimes like at least like acute injuries are likely more so associated with like an actual like injury, like there's something probably pathological going on there, whereas chronic probably a little more like biopsychosocial. Um, but like, what's your view of that? Because like, of like the whole like biomedical model versus like the biopsychosocial model of like pain and injury when it actually goes to powerlifting. Because I think it makes a lot of sense. As you work with assuming more Gen Pop people, like yeah, a lot of it's biopsychosocial, like they don't move, and that's why their back
Yeah.
hurts. But
Yeah.
with powerlifters, how does that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think viewing any kind of injury through the BPS biopsychosocial model is, important because you're not only looking at and it's not to say that okay, if you have an acute injury, it is not solely, it is largely some kind of tissue injury, right? True tissue injury. But, there also is psychological, components that are influencing, maybe how long the pain lasts or how intense the pain is, right? And then that can give you, I mean, not better insight, but it contributes to what the patient is or the client is experiencing at the time. And like kind of going into, okay, like, I know you had a question for me, talking about, uh, does the intensity pain, correlate with the actual damage of tissue, right? And, to that, I'd say maybe, but not always, right? I've had many people come and have like the worst pain they've ever experienced, right? And then they're better in 2 days, or something that's kind of just dull and achy and then it doesn't go away for 3 months, right? So it's like those are, on the extreme examples of that topic. But yeah, it does psychology does play a large factor in how a patient perceives pain, and it is important to take that into account whenever looking at or dealing with an injury.
So then if you have, as a coach, like what should our role be and like how should you appropriately like respond to a lifter, without avoiding like gaslighting them or over like responding?
Yeah, I think first of all, listening, right? Listen to what they have to say. Don't assume anything, right? I think that can become a uh, dangerous place to be if you're just assuming what they feel, because somebody might perceive their pain as like the worst thing they ever had, and maybe they broke something, right? And then you're telling them to lift, and then you make it worse, right? And you don't ever want to be in that position where you are harming the person in front of you, right? By the decisions you make as the coach, right? So always listen first, um, you kind of, I mean, assuming that this is somebody that you've worked for a little bit, you kind of get an understanding of, okay, what kind of person this is, what are they, more emotional in response? Are they pretty level-headed? And this seems like it actually really, really, really hurts them because they never ever complain about anything, right? Then,
Right.
you get a feel on what the person's personality is, and you kind of make decisions from there. But typically, I mean, this is not all the time, but generally it's never anything like crazy, right? And anything that's crazy that's happening is typically very noticeable through visual, right? Like if they snap their wrist from squatting, right? Then okay, you can see their wrist is snapped in half, right? Uh,
Yeah.
if it's anything crazy like that, then yeah, it's pretty obvious usually, but not all the time, right? Could be some kind of stress fracture that's coming into play that then, lingers around for a while because you think it's muscle strain or something, right? And then, so it is really important to just listen. as the coach, I'd say if you're properly load managing from that time of injury for about 4 weeks and it's not really getting any better at all, right? Like it's not showing any signs of progress, and you guys pulled back like a ton, did what you thought was appropriate from that time point, and it's not getting any better, then I think a referral out to some kind of professional would be in your best interest, just because it's not getting any better.
Right. I also do use that 4 week point because like it's like not getting any better, with that management, then yeah, you got to get some investor help. I like how you also pointed out it depends a lot on like how you respond and by how the athlete just in general is.
Mhm.
I've had some clients who like they freak out, they feel like sore. Like they're like, I'm
Yeah,
like number one, you clearly never played sports because like you wouldn't be complaining
sure.
about this if I, but like, and then there's someone like me who like I'll feel something. I'm like, okay, duly noted. I just went heavy or I haven't slept well, whatever. I'm just gonna, chill. But like if I
Yep.
notice it's like definitely there, I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna talk about this and bring it up to my coach. Like I'm not just gonna whine and complain about, you know, the trying to get stronger. Um, but yeah, I think that, as far as, also just like, severity of pain, it's so weird, man. Like I've had some like I had one session where I literally was doing my check-ins. I was in my chair for like a couple hours and I got
Mhm.
up and like this insane shooting pain, like
Uh-huh.
down my entire back and like my leg. And I was like, dude, I have week 4 deadlift today. Like, what the hell? Like, I just stood up and like it was still there. And then I was better
Uh-huh.
like the next day, and I was really awful pain. Like I couldn't really deadlift.
Yep.
Um, and then there's other times where it's like I know Charlie Dixon was saying like he got this terrible like nerve like injury on like his adductor or something like that, and like he didn't feel anything. He completed his entire session. Then all of a
Yeah.
sudden he's like he can't get up out of bed the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it goes, man. Sometimes you just don't know what the heck's going on. It's like could be something super minor and it feels like crap, or it could be something super major and you just fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess basically just, listen to your client and then make appropriate choices there.
Yeah.
And then like also just, don't over catastrophize or try to like tell them, oh, you're fine. Like,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it makes sense. And it's like sometimes like hop on like calls even like if a client like is like really like stressed out about it. Like I've had some
Yeah.
clients who like they just need to talk about it and they just need to feel
Sure.
like
Yeah.
understood.
Yeah, yeah. I think like empathizing with them off the bat, because they're obviously in a pretty vulnerable emotional state because, what they worked so hard for in and out of the gym just got derailed because they're experiencing pain and maybe they can't lift right now, right? To the capacity they want to. So yeah, just being empathetic with them, hearing them out and yeah, just talking sometimes is all they need. Some reassurance that it's going to be okay and we have a plan going forward.
I guess going off of that, how would you say that being like a doctor of physical therapy sort of impacts your overall coaching system that you use? Because like I do think that all coaches have like some sort of like default system or problem solving method or way of like programming, but how does that affect you?
Sure. I think a lot of the skills that was gained from PT school. I mean, obviously, like there's the obvious hard skills. Okay, like yeah, we learn biomechanics, we learn anatomy, right? We learn about multiple systems and how that can affect other systems, right? And so those like actual hard skills, I mean, it's pretty obvious how that would benefit me, right? Okay, yeah, like I can understand biomechanics a little better than maybe someone that didn't take any biomechanics course, right? Or I can understand anatomy better than probably, anybody that doesn't hasn't taken any kind of anatomy course, right? And so or studied anatomy or studied biomechanics, right? I think the most benefit that I've gotten out of PT school that has affected, my coaching alone has been more of like the soft skill type of things where I just talk to a lot of people all day, right? So
Right.
you can get a lot of, and this is not only PT, right? You can go work at some, I don't know, whatever job that requires a lot of talking, right? Just talk to people of all different personalities. I think, the nature of powerlifting is there's going to be some kind of pain involved eventually, right? So when running into that, I kind of know what to do. I kind of know how to talk to the person because I do that all day, every day, right? So I think that's the biggest benefit that I've found. Another thing is just PT school is generally hard. So like going through something difficult and stressful, has allowed me to figure out systems that work for me on like a logistical end, and I can I have the capacity to work really hard, so that helps me, right?
Yeah. I think those soft skills are such a big thing, man. Like, because
Yeah.
like I mean, there are some coaches that are amazing programmers, but they don't have the ability to like empathize or actually talk with their clients. Like, I was an athletic trainer in college, and like, I got to talk to
Yeah.
the athletes and really like understand, like, especially people who are in pain or they don't feel great, like how to talk to them, how to help them out. And
Yeah.
just understanding them. I think that's actually one of the like that might mean like that is truly what coaching is. It's your ability to
It
like
is.
talk and empathize and understand and problem solve. Because like in all honesty, like a big part of coaching too and getting like really good results is like you're letting your clients know that you care about them, and you'll let them know that you care about them not by just by what you're saying, but you listen, you ask good questions, your blocks are always on time.
Yeah.
You remember things about like their life if they bring it up. It's
Yeah.
those little soft skills that like increase the buy-in. And like if anyone
Yeah.
wants to like like my coach is Joe Stanek, and like he was like kind of like, oh, it's kind of weird to me how you've been able to come out and make this like your full-time thing when you haven't like like, as a cash cow or whatever, like a crazy good athlete. And I'm like just sitting there like, well, uh, I think that the main reason why people say to me is they like me and I'm a
Sure.
good
Yeah.
coach, and they know that Adam cares because
Yeah.
I show them.
100%. Yeah, that's like the easiest thing that like sometimes just gets away from people is like just caring, you know? It's
Yeah,
like just care, about the person, and then your the quality of your work will follow if you just care.
exactly. It was like that's the thing, man. Like there's a lot that goes into this, but like I love like just talking about it and just thinking about it and having the having my programming changes like it's like cool, this is interesting, or oh my God, I was right, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's a lot of fun. And uh like I think that like as far as like education goes as a coach too, it just comes down to like I think being a physical therapist is important from like sense of like creating some more trust with
Sure.
your clients, like and like certifications too. Because
Yeah.
like for me personally, like even though like I could help someone out with like rehab, I don't have DPT in my name, so like, that doesn't
Sure.
like.
Yeah.
And then especially how powerlifters think, like powerlifters are unlike like every other niche where like they really value like credentials. Like even bodybuilders don't really care, but like they
Yeah.
really do
Yeah.
care in powerlifting.
Yeah, no, for sure. That definitely is like a huge thing. And it just, immediately helps with buy-in, and obviously buy-in is huge, right, in coaching. Like you need to have some kind of buy-in. Otherwise, that person's just not going to trust your programming, and then they're going to think that what's on the sheet isn't going to work, and then it's just not going to work because they don't believe it's going to work, right? Sometimes what you have on the sheet, from a programming perspective may look optimal, on paper, but in reality, because of how many factors are influencing outcomes, outside of what's on the sheet, it just doesn't work because they don't have the buy-in. So yeah, naturally, like
100%.
having some kind of credentialing, where somebody can trust that you know what you're doing helps.
Yeah, and, and that's why, like, or like, that's why, it's either your resume as a coach, maybe you're a really strong athlete yourself, you accomplish a lot in the sport, um, or like, you just have like really like good like word of mouth, and that's honestly like the biggest way. I think that's like it's just so important, man. It's like that's like really how any business grows, like word of mouth. People tell their
Yeah,
friends, this is good product, solve XYZ problem. You should go to this guy.
for
Um,
sure.
Now, I guess just to wrap things up, I want to ask you about sort of balancing what you might think is optimal to progress with actual lifting enjoyment, because I think a large part of burnout in powerlifting is people kind of like think that sort of the training has to look one way and they don't really like that, or it stops working, and then they're like, okay, well, I'm not making progress, and that's why usually the shelf life of powerlifter is 3 4 years. Not
Mhm.
only that, but also that's when progress starts to slow down a lot. But what do you do when you're taking into like consideration like what your athletes like want to do versus like what you think is best? Like usually what I'll do is I'll say, this is what I think is best, but like what are some things that like you might want here, like as far as like, accessory work, or like what's a variation that you really enjoy?
Yeah, that's a tough one because obviously when things, at least my bias is when things are working, we don't change it, right? But then that can also be really damn boring, especially when you're, going on a year or two of doing like the exact same thing. And it's funny because like the pinnacle of powerlifting training is making progress, right? And
Yeah,
I've had a couple of people where it's like it's just not good enough to keep making progress, in terms of enjoyment. It's like, some obviously when you're not making progress sounds like the best thing ever, right? But then for the people that like just consistently like add 2.5 kilos to your squat every block, right? Or every other block or every 3 blocks, right? It's just not good enough to keep them stimulated, right? Which is insane to think about
yeah,
because like I would kill for that. I was like, oh my gosh, like because I don't make much progress, but because of my own efforts. But I like, oh my gosh, I would love to make 2.5 kilos on my squat right now, right? But for people that maybe, um, uh kind of understimulated because it's just so monotonous, like that's where it's like, okay, like are you getting bored right now? Like is this progress boring? If so, like I'm okay with moving away from that, right? It just our results might be a little more unpredictable from there because
right,
what we've done for so long that's continuing to work and even working now, if it's boring, I also don't want it to be boring for you because powerlifting is generally supposed to be fun, right? For most people, right? At the top end, maybe you have to sacrifice some of that fun for making progress because you're trying to win a world championship or whatever it may be, right? It really depends on what the lifter's goals are for me and where they're at currently. Because like if it's like Kyle, for example, right, who is a really strong lifter of mine, like if it's boring for him, right? But then like we're making progress, then I'll be like, yo, like we just gotta do it. We just gotta do it
yeah,
because we gotta compete, right? And it's working really well. However, there is a caveat there where um, when people get bored, a lot of times I mean naturally just human nature, they're going to stop caring as much about the other stuff like sleep, their nutrition, whatever it may be, right? And so sometimes that can get taken off the rails and now we're not making progress because they're bored, because these other variables are influencing their outcomes. So there has to be some level of enjoyment, to some capacity at all times. It can't just be like, I hate this. Although, some people do get through that, I hate this, and they're able to maintain everything else outside of that because they're super disciplined, right? Then if that's the case, then you just suck it up and keep going, right? But
yeah,
the best, from my experience, the best time to do it, to change anything would be like, okay, after a meet, a lot of times people after a meet, they're kind of a little more they hit the climax, right, of which is the meet, and then they're like, okay, what now, right, if they don't have another meet in mind. So to keep them stimulated and excited about the upcoming training block, which is usually pretty terrible because they just came off a meet, doing other things like that are maybe more fun for them, that would be like the best time to do it.
yeah. I think that that's a great point about like at some point you have to understand this is a sport, and if you ever played sports, you do some things you don't like to do, like conditioning.
Yeah.
Hated conditioning. I was like, well, just to practice. Like, why?
Yeah.
But you do them because it's just part of it's part of the sport.
Yeah.
And I think you had the absolute perfect answer saying it just depends on their goals. Someone's really, really serious about this power thing and making
Mhm.
progress. You know that's what they've expressed to you. Like you as a coach had to kind of hold them accountable to that and what they said. And that's changed. And you're okay, cool, like whatever, fine. But like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
hell, I had one of my clients like, man, I'm just kind of feeling burnt out of SPD and I kind of just was wanting to go down like once a week. Like everything. I'm like, okay. Well, just so you know, like squat and bench are probably going to tank hard.
Yeah.
And then deadlift might hold on. And that
Yeah.
was what happened. He was pissed.
Yeah.
And I was like, I told you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Yeah,
and
the
then like and now we're like back on like, the harder work, doing harder, higher volume SPD. And I'm like, I think you need to do this, that if you want to make progress. And now he's
yeah.
having fun. He's all happy again.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's kind of about understanding that too. It's just like people, clients might tell you something, but like you have to kind of just like read in between the lines. Like, like I love powerlifting, man. And like if I have to like lower down my accessory volume, make sure my squat, bench, and deadlift go up, but like I'll do that for like a brief period of time. But like long term, man, like I gotta do my bodybuilding. I love my bodybuilding, like, building work.
Yeah. Yeah, and going off that, like, when somebody comes and says, I'm getting bored or like I want to do this and that, one thing that I used to struggle with and I've worked on over the past year is when somebody comes, and uh, proposes this idea, right? Because maybe they're bored or whatever it may be. Like one thing I would struggle with is I was very hard-headed and be like, yo, like like that doesn't sound like it would be good for you, right? And as a coach, you're looking out for their best interest, right? And you want to put on paper what is probably based on your experience, based on your expertise, what is going to yield them progress. However, what I found and what I've specifically when I talked to Sean Collins about this is, you know, one thing that he utilizes and I've incorporated into practice is like, and what you did too with this person that wanted to SBD just once a week is give them enough rope to hang themselves with. So, just okay, let's do it, right? And then like your client did, he hung himself, right? And
Yep.
then and then he came back to you and be like, damn, like this sucks. Let's go back to what we were doing. You do, and then he enjoys the process again. And then you get so much buy-in from that, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, so it's like Coach knows what he's talking about. Like I don't.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like, and that's something that's always so funny to me is that like sometimes I get clients that like know about programming,
yeah, yeah,
and like I think that like that they, it's a curse and a blessing because it's like I
Mhm.
love that you know about all this stuff and that you're able to communicate very clearly, but like
Mhm.
to some extent it's just stop thinking of being an athlete, please,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
like I know a lot of stuff and like sometimes I'm just like wow I feel like crap today like or like I took the low end of all my ranges on my week 4. It's like this is my first singles block. I've been hurt for like almost the past year. I've been rehabbing that. And anyways, like I come around and I'm like, okay, like I hit like the low end of the range, and like Joe was like, hopefully we can have like the high end. And I was just like, honestly, man, I don't think we need to change anything. I think I just need to get stronger. Like
Yeah.
I just need more time.
Just need more
Like
time. Yeah. That's
I
a
just
huge
need more time. And in all honesty, like that's the main thing. Like with all this stuff, like because people always like, how do you just stay lean? I'm like, when I'm bulking, I gain like 1 to 2 pounds of like tissue a month. When I'm
yeah.
bulking, I don't go for these massive PRs, even if I have them. And I
Yeah.
think more long term. And like that's really how you make long-term progress in this sport is you have to chip away. And like there are gonna be times when there's spurts of progress and you absolutely take advantage of that. But like this shit just takes time. And there's
Yep.
nothing that like we can really do to like augment that. We can create the environments, but it's like
Yep.
I can't time if my body gets stronger and we try to force that shit. Like I'm going to
Yep.
just start eating more and I'm going to get more muscular. I'm like, no, you're not. You're just going to gain more body fat. Like,
Yep.
here's a study, 5% calorie surplus. This is
Yep.
God.
Yep.
Anyways,
Yeah, and that's the hard thing, to convey to because usually the people that have that mindset usually haven't been doing it for too long, right? And they're used to rapid progress all the time. And like it's really hard to convey that, to somebody with less experience just because they haven't lived it and they kind of have to live it to almost buy into it, right? It's hard to like, believe something that somebody says, until you really experience it yourself. And then once you experience it, then it's like, oh, I'm going to try and tell this to the person that's been doing it for less time than me. And then they don't believe you. And then they experience it themselves. And it's kind of this
yeah,
endless cycle of just like, damn it, like it's just frustrating. It's like, oh my gosh, like it's just gonna take time. Like you just gotta be patient, but then, they're naturally impatient because you were at one point too, right? Because you
yep.
just don't have the experience. And no matter who tells you or what they tell you, you're just not gonna believe it because you're just wanting more and more and more when really it just takes a long time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think going back to what you said about, planning out like macro cycles, that's so important because like a lot of that's going to basically like set up expectations for the first training. If I have like a beginner, I'm like, there's no macro cycle design. You're going to PR like crazy. Like if I just give you the
Yeah,
same block
literally.
over and over and over again, I might change your secondary day, or we're just going to run the same thing. If there's an
Yep,
intermediate, I'm gonna be like, we're probably gonna have at least 2 blocks before you
yep,
PR. If it's
yep,
advanced, it could be like, probably the bare minimum 3, maybe even
yeah.
6. Like, have fun. Welcome to
Yep,
being advanced.
yep, yep,
And they kind of just need to lay out the plan because if you don't do that, like an athlete doesn't know what they're talking about or like what you expect, they're like, wait, I'm not PR right now. It's like I don't need to be strong right now. Like I
yeah, for
even like
sure.
I like because I was like I could take the high end of the range and I could
Yeah,
max out, but
yeah,
like I have a meet in 6 weeks. Like I
yeah.
don't want to max out when I'm not supposed to max out, and the meet is where I max out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the toughest thing, when it's like you're trying to convey. just the pacing of things, right? It's like when someone runs into a plateau per se, it's like, okay, like this is their first plateau ever, and after making, adding 20 pounds to their squat every block, like how do I like give them the reality that this might be the end of the plus 20 pounds every month, right?
Yeah.
And it's really like just, you know, and I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think it's trying to formula or put in their head that, hey, like this is a long-term game, you've only been at it for 6 months. Like naturally you're gonna just educating them about how the process is for most people.
Yeah, and just remind them that like it's just how training goes for like
Yep.
people. Some
Yep.
people, everyone in life also compare themselves to like the top 100 in the sport, which is
Yep.
insane.
Yep.
It's like one of my friends at the gym. He's coached by Petrie and is one of his friends, and he was saying that powerlifting is wild because you have all the in other sports there's Pee Wee and there's Little League and there's college ball and then you go up to like major leagues and whatever. In powerlifting, you're just doing powerlifting. Like you can
Yeah.
compete at the exact same competition that Austin Perkins does if he decides to do
Yep.
a local meet.
Yep.
And you have to just remind yourself that like these athletic careers take time, and
Yeah.
most times like these guys at the top have been training for like at least a decade
Yeah.
consistently, and they're like have insane genetics, and like
Yep.
you can't like really compare yourself. And one of the biggest things I tell my clients, it's not about being better than other people. It's about being your best. Because if you are like that's why I keep showing up. I know I'm not going to be John Hack. I'm not going to be John
Yeah.
Hack. Like, I would love to be John Hack, but I can't.
Hey,
I
you
just
never
know.
know. You never
You
know.
know. Well, what, maybe when I
You never
actually, maybe
know.
when I actually am not victim weight, but like it's just one of those things where it's like I just want to be my best. I want to
Yeah.
be the best Adam. And so I'm going to do all the things I need to do outside of training to be my best. And that's the process orientation I instill in all my athletes and in all my clients, regardless if they're powerlifters, if they're just the average mom that wants to lose 20 pounds, like it's the same mindset and with,
Yeah.
with, with
And
anything with anything in life. And honestly, man, like your ability to make progress, like I'm a fucking great meet. And you know what? I had the shittiest 2 years of training of my entire life. The only reason I'm here is because like I think success is all about how long are you willing to sit in that shitty part until you get the break.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a hard reality for a lot of people, right? It's like, you know, just when stuff is going bad, like it's hard to do that alone, right? That's why I think it's like really important to have somebody, in your corner, like a coach, to, be there for you when those times come, because they are coming, right? It might not be tomorrow or 6 months from now, but it might be like 3 years from now, and it's gonna come, and you're gonna get really badly injured, or you're just gonna like just be in this lull for a really long time. But as long as you stick with that person, right, and try to problem solve with that person, eventually you guys will get somewhere, right? The Yeah, I mean it's just a tough situation to be in, but everyone goes through it.
Well, I think we had a great conversation. So thank you
Yeah,
so much for
sure.
coming on.
Of
If
course.
people
Thanks for
want to
having
do
me.
follow you or hire you for your coaching, where should they head?
Sure. You can go to my Instagram. It's at Dungy Gains, Dungy Gains, Gains. I have links in my bio for that, if you want to sign up for coaching or anything like that.
Well, I'll make sure I include that in the show notes. And
For
thank you
sure.
guys for listening to this podcast. I'll talk to you in the next one.